Ooh, that looks tasty.
Welcome, folks. Today, the Hunger Gamer is back today with Jerry Hawthorne. I believe the title is now lead developer of Plaid Hat Games.
I think I'm the creative director or chief creative officer or something like that.
Oh, that's even better. With the
Yeah,
chief creative officer. Guys, he is an officer, so everybody salute, please. Jerry Hawthorne of Plaid Hat Games. And you may not realize it, but you have played a lot of his games before. So I want to start out with, now, Jerry, you've been in the business for quite some time, and you designed a bunch of successful games: Mice and Mystics, Aftermath, Stuffed Fables, or just a few of them. What made you decide, you know what, I'm going to make my own games and make that my career?
Well, it pretty much happened by chance more than anything. And it was a slow process. It wasn't like I woke up one day and suddenly I'm a game designer. I always say that I just basically said yes to a lot of things and found myself, involved in the industry deeper than I had ever even wanted or thought, and that ended up being a source of revenue for me. And finally, that revenue got to the point where I was able to quit my day job and do this full time. So,
what were you doing before?
I was a hairstylist, pretty popular hairstylist here locally. Super busy, booked solid for months out, and so and that's how basically I paid the bills and supported my family. And early on, I guess I've been working in the industry, in the board game industry, since about 2005, and it really started happening when I was involved with this game called HeroScape that was released by Hasbro in 2004. I discovered the game as I was buying Christmas presents for my nephews, and I went ahead and bought HeroScape because I had seen it, even though it was months in advance of Christmas, but I was buying for birthdays and stuff like that. But I bought several copies of the game because I had looked at it on the internet at pictures from the New York City Toy Fair, and I saw that it had the miniatures of the prototype they had at the New York City Toy Fair. A few of those miniatures were from the old game Hero Quest, which is like my favorite game of all time. And I saw that they used those, and then I started going down this rabbit hole. I found out that Stephen Baker, the designer of Hero Quest, was also part of the design elements. He designed some of the elements of HeroScape and basically did the foundation of the game. And then Rob Davio and Craig Van Ness, they were the ones who really took the game to market. So these are some big names in the gaming industry and stuff. And so I was immediately attracted to the game. It sounded great. So when the game came out in 2004, I bought several copies and I started playing it with my nephews and stuff. And I wrote an email to Craig Van Ness and telling him about how much I enjoyed the game. And he brought me on at Hasbro as a playtester. And it's just sort of my stuff sort of grew from there. I became lead playtester, and then I was asked to start developing cards for the game, and started making money in the game industry, and that just kept on growing and growing and growing. And I was part of a design group that did the Dungeons and Dragons version of HeroScape for Wizards of the Coast. And then after that, one of my fellow buddies that I was working with at Hasbro, Colby Dowk, he spun off and started his own company because he had this card game called Summoner Wars, and he was trying to get it published through Hasbro, but Hasbro wasn't interested in it because Hasbro has this tendency to try to stay within their existing game lines. And so he shopped it around a little bit, and then he decided, forget it, I'm going to have to publish this myself. I'm going to have to self-publish. And in order to do that, he had to create like a little game company. And then after that game was published, it gathered some popularity, and he realized, if I have a little game company, I'm going to need more games. And he was so busy, maintaining that game because it was an expandable card system. He started asking his friends, if they had any game designs that they were, kind of tinkering with. And I told him about Mice and Mystics, and he's like, wow, that sounds great. I want to see a prototype of it. He gave me a 6-month period to work on the prototype, and I was to show it to him at Gen Con. And then at Gen Con, I showed it to him, and he's like, okay, I want to publish this game. And that's how it goes.
I mean, Mice and Mystics was, I don't know what qualifies a game as a hit, but I feel like that's a pretty big hit. And where did that come from? I mean, little mice running around, and I feel like the storybook adventure game, like I don't know if Mice and Mystics is the first that did it, but it's the first one the first one I'd ever seen. It almost seems like it was a little bit ahead of its time as far as the fully integrated narrative campaign goes.
Yeah, there probably really hadn't been much narrative games before that had sort of a guided narrative like that. I don't ever want to presume that I'm the first at this or the first at that, but basically with Mice and Mystics, I was captivated by, I love Pixar films, and I was captivated by the movie The Incredibles. And the thing that captivated me was the idea that a family could adventure together. And I thought, wow, if I could gamify The Incredibles, then you could have a mother and a father and their children, and they could all be superheroes, and they could all have superpowers that sort of meshed with each other. And so I started tinkering around with this design idea on how to gamify The Incredibles. And about that time, my daughter was really struggling with learning how to read. And she loved mice, like mice. She had mice pets. She had stuffed mice all over her room. She was really into mice. And so this idea came to me because I was reading this article about how to help your child learn how to read and stuff like that. They said that breaking up the reading into smaller chunks and having some kind of activity in place to break up the reading really helps kids, and especially children with reading difficulties or a reading difference like my child has. If those activities involve a different part of their brain or involve some sort of dexterity, like sometimes they'll have kids sit on balls, so that they work on their balance, and that really helps this little filter in the brain. It helps you learn how to read by trying to maintain your balance for some reason. So I was reading all these articles, and I thought, okay, rolling dice, moving little figures around, this is like using your manual dexterity, and rolling dice and then using math is completely different than reading. And I thought, okay, a game would be perfect for this because I could write a little story so that she would learn how to read. I would break that reading up into chunks, which in the game in Mice and Mystics I call story moments. And so it really grew out of a need that I felt to try to create something that could be a tool that parents could use to help their kids find the joy in reading and understand the connection between action and what you're reading about. Because I was feeling like my daughter wasn't really absorbing what she was reading. She was sort of robotically going through the words, but she was struggling, and her leg was twitching all the time, and she couldn't control her body. She was trying to read, and it was really disconcerting for me. So I started working on, I took that idea that I had started building the mechanics for the Incredibles game, and I just replaced all the characters with mice. And I had them, I started creating this adventure story about, I had felt like I had to have a backstory for why these mice had, fantasy weapons and stuff like that. So I created the story about this fantasy kingdom where the main advisors to the king get turned into mice, and that's really how Mice and Mystics came about.
Yeah. I believe I read somewhere that all the characters are based on people you know.
Yes, and so I didn't know how to write. I'd never written anything before. I'm not a writer, and so in addition to reading a bunch of information on how to help your child learn how to read, I was reading a bunch of information on how to write, and classic writing. And I found some articles that were really basic, and they taught you the basics of classic writing, and they talked about the hero's journey, and this different that stories have this certain arc, and that all modern stories have these very similar story arcs. And so I just basically modeled my story after that. but I didn't know how to breathe life into the characters. So I didn't know what to do. So I just imagined how my friends and my family members would react to certain situations. And then I picked the personality types of my friends and family members that matched how I wanted the characters to react in the game. And then that was the model that I used to, like, to have their reactions and stuff.
Assuming you shared the game with any of them, did any of them after the fact be like, is that me? Or did they already know?
No, nobody knew, and it wasn't so obvious that they could pick themselves out, and I didn't really, I mean, there's no situations in the story that would have any sort of real world relevance. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't think anybody ever saw characters like, that's me, dang it.
I would never do that. I would not.
One thing I did do is the evil villain in the game is called Venestra, and she's named after Craig Van Ness. And the reason that I named her after Craig Van Ness is because he named a villain after me in Heroescape called Sir Hawthorne, and it's this traitor. And I'm like, I'm not a traitor. I don't think I've ever double crossed anybody in my life. So I made him the villain in my game. So it's sort of like a little.
That's funny. That's delightful. And then you get to take him out over and over again.
That's right.
Teach him a lesson.
We just defeated Craig Van Nestra.
Yes. It's the most popular game in Craig Van Ness's house. So do you remember the first time you saw a copy of your game on a shelf?
No, I mean, my game, Mice and Mystics, came out. It debuted at Gen Con. Like, the first time I ever saw my game is we unpacked a box at Gen Con. The game arrived. It got sent directly to Gen Con. So we opened up these boxes and there was my game, and it's one of those things where, like, when you put as much into the game as I do, like, just seeing it for the first time, it almost brought tears to my eyes, because you see this, like, the culmination of, like, years worth of effort, and you just see this thing in physicality, and it's there, and it's real, and it becomes very, very real very quickly, and it's a pretty emotional moment. Somebody went into a game store and they saw my game on the shelf, and they took a picture of it and they posted it to the internet or something of Mice and Mystics. And that was the first time I saw Mice and Mystics on a store shelf, was a picture that somebody took on the internet. It was a very remarkable moment, because I think it was my brother who took the picture. So he was like seeing, having my brother be proud of me for seeing one of my games in a store shelf. I think that was a pretty big moment for me.
How did it sell at that first Gen Con? Do you remember?
Well, the first Gen Con, our shipment didn't arrive in time for Gen Con, so we only had like 3 copies of the game, so that we could only run demos. We couldn't really sell any, and it was unfortunate because an enormous amount of interest was generated by that Gen Con. People were crowding around our booth to watch and marvel at this game that was based on something I don't think anybody had ever done a fantasy, adventure game based on mice. And so they were all crowding around and checking it out and stuff. And the pre-orders started rolling in, and we sold out of our first print run before we were actually able to distribute it. And we sold out of our second print run before we were able to actually distribute that. So we had gone into our third print run before we were ever starting to actually catch up with the demand for the game. So yeah, it was really popular right at first. But you have to understand, like, this is, back in 2012. And I know it doesn't seem like that many years ago, but 8 years ago, the gaming industry was completely different. There was no Kickstarter, or at least if there was, it wasn't really catching the big wave of
it wasn't the core of the board game.
It wasn't industry. It wasn't impacting our industry as much. And like dungeon crawlers, there was only a handful that were actually still in print, and they weren't particularly a popular niche at the time. They were, I mean, among dungeon crawl kind of gamer fans, they were, but there was just there was a very big, wide lane that you could hop into, and so being first to market with a certain kind of game like Mice and Mystics was it had an impact at the time, both on the success of the game, but also on the gaming industry as a whole. Because if that's 8 years ago, and some father played it with his 11 or 12-year-old son or 10-year-old or whatever, that kid's pushing 20 now and becoming an independent board game consumer themselves, and their memories of playing Mice and Mystics with their mom or dad, that might be extremely influential on how it might guide them, and it might guide them towards our industry for their lives.
So I don't know. I'm not going to say all of your games. I don't know all of your games, but most of your games have some kind of either anthropomorphic animal or the stuffed animals that come to life. Where do you just enjoy that as a thing, or is there a reason that you gravitate towards that personification of animals? Or
no, I'm not like I mean, I love Redwall and all those classic. I love Disney movies. I love Pixar. So I love this kind of stuff. I just love it. But I'm also not like some sort of fanatic about it either. What I've discovered is that the stories that I want to tell are sometimes more effectively told if I take humans out of the picture. If I just remove humans and I tell stories just that are about the human condition, but I'm telling it through the eyes of these different peripheral creatures and stuff that we have. It's just more poignant, and it makes people think, and it engages people in a different way. And I find that to be it's a very motivating, way of writing for me. So I like that. I like it a lot, but it doesn't have to do with anthropomorphic stuff, and it doesn't have to do necessarily with little cute critters or stuffed animals or anything. It's just being able to tell a story from a different perspective is a comfort zone for me, I think.
And I guess it might also have the added bonus that it feels like it makes a lot of your games feel more family friendly because of that in many ways. Though I will say Aftermath has some heavier stuff in it.
Yeah, intentionally, but the idea is that when you remove humans from the equation, when you just remove humans, then you also remove a lot of the baggage that we carry with us into stories and into learning and stuff. You get rid of the different things that human beings naturally do to separate ourselves from each other, which I don't want. I want to have a game where everybody can just leave that behind and jump in. And if my game makes them think about the human condition without all that other baggage in the way, I think that's where I really like to write. That's the sweet spot for me. And so, like for instance, Aftermath is a story about a lot of things, but it's primarily a story about environmental custodianship and the dangers of mass consumerism, and like it has some subject matter that I wanted to talk about, but I wanted to do it in an entertaining format. And the best way to do that, to think about humans and think about our planet, in my opinion, the best way to show this stuff was by getting rid of humans and saying, what if humans weren't here anymore? I mean, what if we're so insignificant that our disappearance, is just a trivial thing, What if the inheritors of our earth, what if because I started with this idea of that old saying, the meek shall inherit the earth. And so I thought, what if these meek creatures inheriting the earth suddenly had to realize shockingly how brutal life on earth is, I don't know. It's just interesting and thought-provoking, but also adventurous at the same time.
It's funny as you talk about it, it made me think of Tolkien and Lord of the Rings and the undertones that you can read all those books, never get it, but
Yeah.
it's you stop and if you look for it, if you pay attention, that's there. So now when I finish my Aftermath campaign, I'm gonna be like, oh, is that what's Jerry telling me the whole way through? I think I'm about halfway through, so it's gonna now I'm gonna be looking deep. For you as a designer, what comes first, mechanics or theme?
I don't know. Sometimes I tinker with a set of mechanics, and then I I say, yeah, this is a good little set of mechanics. This could be an engine, right? So I'm looking for an engine really. This could be an engine, and then I sometimes just wait for a good story to come along that would match that engine, and sometimes I come up with a really great story idea, but I don't have an engine, and then I just let that story idea sort of simmer until I do have an engine. So it's sort of organic. The ideas come when they come.
So you kind of have a little pantry of stories that you want to tell, and a little pantry of mechanical engines you're coming up with, and then ah, then when they
Yeah,
come
yeah,
together.
exactly. Like figuring out which of those stories and which of those little mechanics. Sometimes it's a little itty bitty micro mechanic, like a sub mechanic that I've tinkered around with. And sometimes it's a with the stories. Sometimes they're not big enough stories to tell a whole game, So sometimes I write just for I don't know, just for the enjoyment of it, and just to help my practice. And I just have the files that I dump those stories into. And then sometimes I'll go back and I'll find those stories. I'll be like, hey, this story really matches the tone of this game I'm working on. I'll change the name of the characters, I'll change the setting, and I'll put it in here. And so I can plug and play a lot of this stuff.
Most of your games are adventure story, dungeon crawlish. Do you have an abstract tile laying game or a deck builder floating around somewhere in there, or is this just what you like to do and this is what you want to do?
Um, well, I would like to work with the tool set that I have naturally, which for me, the things I like to do and the way I like to design has a lot to do with this vision I have in my mind of what I want the players to be behaving like when they play the game. And I don't really like I don't really close off uh, any game types, but I probably you probably I mean I don't want to say never, but I might like playing a tile laying game, but you might not ever see me design one just because other people do that so well, and I would have to like completely relearn my craft in order to do that. I'd have to be so interested in tile laying games, as an example, that I would just I would have to like side rail what I already like to do. So I don't know. I'll probably just stick with what I do. Adventure games, but like within the space of like dungeon crawly adventure games, story narrative driven games, within this space there is a lot of different ways to express ideas. And like the game I'm working on right now has got some new elements that I've been working on, a new game engine that I've been working on, and I find that really exciting. And it's different than the previous stuff I've done, but it's also somewhat similar too. So you know, borrowing from my previous stuff, but at the same time, creating something new that feels fresh.
And I mean, even as we talked before I started recording, I've been playing both Aftermath and Mice and Mystics
Hmm.
lately. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but it really does feel like the mechanics of Aftermath are an evolution out of Mice and Mystics, in some ways. I mean, changing dice for cards, but it feels very familiar to me to play both.
Yeah, well, I made it intentionally familiar. I was hoping that fans of Mice and Mystics would buy it and play it and feel familiar you know, with some of the elements feeling that way, like the cheese being used, cheese symbols being used as food, and some of the other elements that we used. Um, but yeah, I'm kind of like not into dice right now. I love them, but like I love how I love how cards work, how they, if you have a deck of cards, then every card in that deck is going to be used at some point. With dice, you could roll them and you might not ever roll a certain value on the dice, but like I like the certainty of the cards. I really like dice and card hybrids, which you saw in Aftermath, where you can play up to a certain level of certainty with your cards, and the more powerful your hand, the more certainty you have, but there's always that little element of risk involved, and I like that.
You talk a little bit about good conventions. I mean, for you, obviously, Colby is, his wheelhouse. But how important do you feel going and taking old games and what's coming up is for you guys going to conventions? How important do you feel that is?
In the past, it's been hugely important. Being there and has always been a big moment for us to have FaceTime with the people that support us, and we work hard, like all of us. Like nobody is above having to work that booth in our little company, and so having the public come out, go and visit our booth, and see us working our butts off, hawking games at the conventions, meeting people, getting them excited about our games, teaching our games to people and stuff like that. I think it's hugely important, and it's always been a really, really, really big thing for us. Especially Gen Con has always been our convention, because we've always had such an enormous amount of just positivity, and we've sold so many games at Gen Cons in the past that the amount of sales that we did paid for our Gen Con and then some, and it really gets our games out into the public. And it's nice to be able to send those games out into the public after having had a personal interaction with the people who buy those games. And usually this is in advance of the game's release, so you really send this positivity out into the world about your game. I think it's a great way to sort of herald the delivery of a new product.
I think it was, I don't know, a month or so ago that the big split of Plaid Hat and Asmodee happened. You're now independent again. And you were kind enough to share with us a blog that you wrote, kind of about the bittersweetness of that split. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about that now that there's a little more distance from the event? And obviously,
Sure.
only your thoughts, not
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So it's really weird. We're missing a large chunk, maybe over half of our staff. So I don't get to work with those people that I love and care about anymore. And that's really, it's really still sad. My games that I don't get to work on anymore, this is going to be a grief I'm probably going to carry for a long time. I still generate ideas for those games. I still have ideas coming in my head, and sometimes I have files of unfinished expansion material or unfinished fiction that I've written for those games, and I see those in my on my computer. I see those files, and it just kind of hits me in the feels, because I had some really ambitious ideas for some of those stories, especially Mice and Mystics, with just wanting to sort of start making more stuff for that game. All the plans that we had for Aftermath, which are all incredible plans, all these cool ideas, those I can't say they're wasted creativity, but those all feel like unresolved, unrequited loves of mine. However, I am working on a new game right now, which is incredibly satisfying, and it's super exciting because of the new innovations that we're going to be putting into it. And it's going to take the place where I was at when it comes to our company and writing for those previous games. This is going to be my first game that I publish after being newly independent and having a lot more agility and local control over our product, as you can do when you're an agile little independent studio. It's pretty cool.
Can you elaborate a little bit on some of these other benefits of being independent again?
Okay. Well, first and foremost, my chain of command is one person, right? It's just one person. So, like, if I have an idea and I'm passionate about that idea, there's only one person I need to talk to. There's only one person involved in deciding whether my idea has merit or not, or only one person involved in helping me implement that idea if they feel it has merit. And that person is just my boss, Colby. That's hugely different, because if you're a creative and you're working in a large, network of with all these little stopgaps where things have to be, approved at this level, and then on this level, and then on this level, and then on this level. And sometimes those people who are in charge of approving decisions and stuff, they don't have any sort of connection to you or what you do. They don't understand sometimes where you're going with something. That lack of, of agility when it comes to decision making, that's all gone. It's just, I know right away whether an idea needs to be followed up on or not. I can find out right away. So that it's decisive and it's agile, and it's not always based upon bottom line. Sometimes my boss, Colby, will make decisions because something's right, or something's new and interesting, or something's innovative, and he can see it, and not some bureaucrat. So that's really cool stuff. Furthermore, when it comes to changing game industry, small companies are way more agile than a big company. So if we come together with our meetings, and it's just a few of us, and we are all part of the decision-making process in our company, and we're quick and we're decisive, we can respond to shifts and changes in the industry far quicker than a big company that has to sort of turn their big ship around. And that agility, it makes so much difference in our industry, so much difference, because our industry is moving fast. It's innovating quickly. And you don't know if next week some new game's going to come out that's going to change our industry, and big companies have a hard time navigating all that.
I'm just curious, to kind of riffing off that, for those of us who are watching and listening to this, can you come up with an example of a game that came out at some point that you're like, oh my gosh, that changed the industry? Kind of the perspective.
Well, sure. I mean, there's tons of them. There's games like, for instance, Zombicide changed the industry because it's not the most brilliant game, but the execution and the concept are great, and everything about how Zombicide was marketed and its impact on the industry, its ability to activate the game stores and make game stores more interested in board games when they were like really just getting into Magic card games and sort of like phasing out board games. The amount of money that game generated, it's a game changer. It changes the industry. It pushed the Kickstarter into the forefront. It made plastic miniatures, be much bigger than they were in the past. So, a game like Zombicide is a big game changer. Basically, any superstar game really sort of changes things. You could say a game like Root. Root is it's so asymmetric, and it's so brilliant, and it's so asymmetric that every player sort of has to play by a different set of rules. And this is where the ambition and the execution and the art direction, everything comes in. This game changes everything. It changes what people know about, that kind of game, just because of how new and fresh it is. So
yeah, to show to everybody, this is possible. You really can have everybody play a completely different game, but still play the same game at the same time. Just speaking of Root.
I think like our game Forgotten Waters is going to be one of those kind of games, by the way. Let me explain why I think this, and why we're seeing that it's probably true. When you play Forgotten Waters, it's a truly entertaining experience. I mean, it will sweep you up and make you feel like you're on an adventure together. But it's also very light and it doesn't have a mechanical heaviness to it. So you're really sort of able to enjoy the story, respect the mechanics and everything. But here's the deal. because we've always tried to be the innovators when it comes to narrative games, right? We have gotten the highest quality, some of the highest quality voice acting that has ever been in the board. I mean, I'm going to say right now, we have the highest quality team of voice actors in the board gaming industry for sure, right?
Every other company, the gauntlet is down.
The gauntlet's down. Like, we got these guys. Every voice is acted by a different actor. We have background atmosphere, sound effects going on. This isn't just like a narrator. This is like the whole thing's acted out with sound, and you hear the ocean, and you know all the pirates and all the voices and everything. It is top notch. It is top notch, and that's why it's like blowing everybody away, because the level of entertainment value that you're getting when you're getting this game, the level of entertainment value is off the charts. And the barrier of entry is so low, like anybody can learn how to play it within minutes, and then you're swept off on this big adventure. So there's very little baggage, there's very little overhead, and it's mostly just an interactive entertainment thing. And I'm super proud of it. And I wasn't even part of the team that worked on it. So
now that actually leads you right into my next question I had for you. So one of the things that you do is you develop other games. Like you got to develop a little bit this one. Most people in the game industry, like, we know what a publisher does. They make the games. We know what a designer does. They design the games. What is development? What is that? What do you do?
Okay, so you got to. I wasn't a developer on Forgotten Waters.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was just a friendly voice in the office, offering opinion, and that's it. And I did a bunch of play testing with it, but only to offer opinion. The developers and the designers and stuff, they're the real champions here. Developers are the unsung heroes of the board game industry, because sometimes, like with me, my games were really sort of messy, and a developer is just really good at coming in and saying, because you have a lot of workload when you're a designer. I do everything myself. So, like for instance, working with Colin Flores, our developer, we don't have him anymore, but he was our developer right up until the big shift. Working on Aftermath together, like, we would play it, and then he would have recommendations, and he would take files and he would clean them up, and he would take the language and he would make it all standardized, and he would do, like, there's just tons of stuff. I need 10 more items because we don't have enough items. I need 10 more items. I don't have time to do that right now. Colin, can you develop some items? So he creates, new items for the game that match the theme of the game and stuff like that. But essentially what a developer does is they take your lump of coal and they shine it into a diamond for getting a game prepped for release. That's really what they do.
It's one of the things I've been most, I think I talked to you a little bit offline a while ago about it, but as I met one of the designers / developers for a game called Merchant's Cove, and because he's kind of local, so we spent a lot of time just playing games and chatting, and it blew my mind. It's like, wait, you did this? You're responsible for this, and you're responsible for this, and a developer is not a title that I'd even thought about, and I'm sure it's like that for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, like, also like the producer, a game's producer is a hugely influential part of a game's creation, and people don't understand that either. But like Colby is my studio manager, but he's also my producer, and what he does is he basically looks at my design and he finds out where the fun is, and then all the stuff that he thinks that, like, could be either changed or eliminated, he just says change or eliminate. You know what I'm saying? And
then you get to say, but I okay.
Well, if I feel like there's an important reason for it, but I'll defend a certain thing if I feel like there's a certain reason for it, or if I just feel like I'm passionate about that thing and I feel like keeping it in there, But it's not like an argumentative situation. I trust Colby's magic wand. Well, that sounds weird. I trust Colby's opinion,
Now everyone has an image that Colby just walks around dressed as a full wizard in the office and just.
He's extremely decisive, and he's very, very quick to finding the fun in a game. You know what I'm saying? He's extremely quick, and very extremely intuitive, and he's a very decisive person. So all those qualities they really work in conjunction with how we work in it at the office.
So speaking of the office, I think most of us probably assume that you just roll into the office every day and pick up a set of dice and play some games till the end of the day. What does your day actually look like as chief creative?
Well, before we went on this shelter in place orders, we would go into the office, and it's very quiet, and I would be in my office most of the day. I have a writing chair that I sit in when I write that is way more comfortable than my desk chair, but I can't really write in my desk chair because I have to be comfortable, and sometimes you'll see me staring out the window as I'm like, crafting an idea in my head before I put it down. And so it's really rather quiet. Then we schedule play tests with various members of the office, and then we execute on those play tests. And sometimes those are ad hoc, where you just come walking out. Hey, can you just come over here and help me roll some dice on this for a second? But most of the time it's like a scheduled thing. Like, hey, Nikki, do you have time Wednesday morning to play, play through chapter whatever of this game or that game? And we just coordinate it like that. So when the games are being played, it's typically even when the games are being played, it feels a little bit like work, or you might look at it and it might seem like work because we'll have a notepad next to us. We'll be taking notes. We'll be stopping the game to talk about a certain thing. Hey, this isn't working for me. Or does it always work like this? Yeah. Why? Because that's broken. Oh, okay. This kind of stuff. And so sometimes it doesn't really feel like a game is being played accurately, like you would see in like a game store or something. The environment can be fun, though. I don't want to make it sound like it's not fun. It's just not what you would expect. It's not like walking into a game store and seeing a bunch of people playing games all day long.
Yeah, it's not the Willy Wonka's Game Factory. You're just kind of rolling around playing. Well, except for Colby dressed as a wizard with his wand. So you mentioned earlier. Now I know a lot of it's secret. What can you tell us about that game that you're working on that you're so excited about that's coming next? And I'm going to push for as much detail as I can get, so you just have to say, nope, can't tell you.
I'm working on a cooperative adventure game with a narrative element to it, and it sounds just like any of my other games, basically. It'll have plastic miniatures, and, it's going to be really cool. It's going to involve this new some of the new ideas that I have developed around how to craft your story and how to cooperate with each other. Some new twists on cooperative board game kind of stuff. I know that sounds just vague and like actually kind of boring because it's sounds so lacking in detail.
Anything about any of the theming?
Fantasy.
And well, I think based on our conversation, I think we can suppose that it's not humans. So we're there.
There's one human.
the person playing. And so so I guess the real question then would be, when do we get to find out a little more about it?
That I do not know. We're hoping to have a release of it next year. So it would probably be towards the end of the year that I'm able to talk more about it.
Gotcha.
If the game is coming along and it seems like it's going to finish up on time, then that makes us feel a lot more comfortable talking about stuff. But until I know from my boss that I can talk about stuff, then I'm just going to probably keep it under wraps.
So now these last two questions I have. The rule is no Jerry Hawthorne games, no Plaid Hat games can be picked. What is hitting your table when you play games right now with I guess with your family? What's coming?
Well, we really like Deep Blue. Have you played Deep Blue?
I have not.
That's one that's like been a success in my household because everybody has been able to sort of pick it up and learn how to play it and stuff, and it's just a fun game. It's got some push your luck elements to it. It's got a little bit of hand development and management stuff to it, and but overall it's just a very simple competitive game. that just has a lot of neat stuff that my family likes. And we've also played Escape the Lost Castle.
That's the one that's
Escape.
all black and white cards.
Yeah, is it Escape?
Dark Castle, I think.
Dark Castle, sorry. I get all these Escape this and Escape that kind of stuff mixed up. Yeah, Escape the Dark Castle. We've been playing. Me and my son have been playing that one, and it's a little too random for him, I think. My son cannot stand. He really cannot stand luck. He does. Emotionally, it just kills him when he loses something based upon, the chancy roll of a die. Me, doesn't bother me. I don't care. Losing is no big deal to me.
And then just riffing off that, again, no Plaid Hat or Hawthorne games. If you got to pick one game that is your favorite game of all time, can you do it?
The game that I'll never sell, the game that I'll always own, that'll always be my favorite, is probably Hero Quest. And, undoubtedly Hero Quest. I have a beautiful, beautiful mint copy of the game, and I have mint versions of the first two expansions, and then I have, in the shrink wrap, I have the Barbarian Quest and the Elf Quest, both in the shrink wrap, and then I have some that are all trashed from playing so much.
Does your family play that with you?
No. I should probably get my son to try to play it, but if me and my son played it, it would be me against him, since it's not a cooperative game. He prefers cooperative games, always has. I remember he doesn't like competitive games. Years ago, when I got him to play Dungeon, the old game Dungeon. Mm-hmm. So we were playing Dungeon, and he was like going to win the game. He had gathered up more treasure and everything, and he was headed towards the stairwell to get back out and to win the game. And he stopped right there. And I'm like, "What are you doing?" It's like, "You can win, Dad. You can win." He didn't want to win against me. And I'm like, "Well, okay, well, go ahead. I don't mind." And he's like, "I don't care." So I moved my pawn over there, and we left the castle together. Or left the dungeon together, so that
And then that was when he designed a co-op game to play with him.
Yeah, that's when he was little. He just didn't want to compete against me, and he still doesn't. And he's just not into competitive games at all. So, and I mean, he must get it from his pop, because my favorite games are cooperative games. And that's really weird though, because Hero Quest, we didn't have cooperative games back then. Hero Quest would have made a fantastic cooperative game if you think about it.
And for everyone who maybe doesn't know, am I correct? That's a one versus many, right? One person plays like the dungeon lord, and everyone else is the heroes.
No, right? Not the dungeon lord. They play Morcar, or they play Zargon or Morcar. It depends upon which side of the pond you're from or whatever, but. Yeah, they play Zargon, which is the evil wizard that's like the dungeon master who's trying. But it's really competitive. You're trying to defeat the heroes. Some people mistake, and they don't play it competitively, and I think that's a mistake. The best way to play Hero Quest is for the person who plays Zargon to like literally try to defeat the heroes. Otherwise, it's just too easy on the heroes. You have to really, really work it and try to defeat those heroes.
Well, I really, oh wow, we're pushing an hour going. But I really appreciate the time, even though I did not wheedle out any more details of the next game from you. But is there any thoughts you want to leave everybody with before we sign off here?
Sure. Yeah, I know we're all probably going to be on shelter-in-place orders for a while longer. Anybody that's here, at least. Probably around the world. I don't know how far your reach is on these podcasts that you do, but
throughout the universe.
But our board game industry the sales are up in the board game industry, and so we're really part of the glue that's holding everybody together and keeping everybody from going crazy while they shelter at home with their families. And as soon as the global economy starts to kick back up again, have no fear, the board game industry is just going to be booming, like right back, maybe even more than before, just because everybody has recognized and maybe even like initiated new habits of playing games more with their families and stuff.
Again, thank you so much for being here. And everybody, thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you.